Okay, the next thing we're going to do is talk about our show design and our process of show design. We kind of have a unique situation that I think works really well in terms of the way our design team works. I'm in charge of kind of the big picture music and the front ensemble arranging. Tim Jackson's in charge of the battery arranging, and Tim Fairbanks is in charge of the visual, but we really don't isolate ourselves that way in the way we approach the show. That's kind of what we oversee and what we actually make happen on the floor, but really the three of us are very involved in each one of those elements. So for example, I think that Tim has as much input in the drill as Tim Fairbanks does in the pit music. All over the place is kind of a trade-off. And so instead of me just writing the front ensemble parts and then sending it to Tim, and he writes the battery parts, and then he sends it to Tim, and he stages it on the floor, it's a lot more fluid than that, and there'll be a lot of times where we allow other elements to take the lead. So we might have a part of the show where Tim has written some battery music that is a really important part of the show, but it's based on that so that they can have the focus, and then what I'll do is I'll arrange music on top of it. Sometimes there's a really cool drill effect that Tim Fairbanks will want to do, and we know how many counts it's going to be, and then we allow our parts to support that effect. And I think that's a really important part in making the overall show come across well. So I recommend that type of working environment and relationship to be in any program. I think it's the best way to go. The next thing we're going to do is kind of talk about the music orchestration of our first part of the show. We have about a minute and a half of show that we're going to play for you today. There's a few different elements with the front ensemble I want to talk about. The first one is our use of electronics. The electronics choir, I should say, and this is actually going to be literal when you hear it, but that's kind of the new frontier of the activity. Obviously, there's a lot of percussion instruments, and that's the meat and potatoes of what we do and the most important thing in terms of training and all that. But in terms of the different sounds that you hear, the electronics is kind of the cutting edge where we have an unlimited amount of resources to be creative and to make the product more accessible to larger audiences. So one of the things that's real big in the activity right now is sampling. And some people will sample lyrics of pop tunes. Some people do all sorts of different sounds and effects and things that add to the production of the show. We actually start our show with some choral vocals. We're doing a piece called Luke's Arunque by Eric Whitaker as the first part of the show. And it starts very, very quiet, and all it is some vocal samples. So I'm going to just have you hear a couple of those. What we have to do in order to make this performable for WGI is to cut them up into the different rhythms that exist, which takes a lot of time on the designer's part to both plan and execute. And I want to give a shout out to a guy named Kevin Shaw. He's not here right now, but he's part of our design team as well. He kind of oversees the electronic sounds and the sampling and takes what I give him to a whole new level of quality and professionalism. So can you just play, Randy, can you play some of the samples that we have, maybe starting at letter B? Just play, yeah, play a few notes so we can. Yeah, so she triggered each one of those different quarter notes that you heard for a different chord of vocals. Those are real people singing, and it's a recording of those real people singing rather than just using a choral patch on the keyboard. It's a much more professional sound. It's much more realistic and sounds like the original. So hopefully it'll be able to emotionally connect to the audience better. Next thing I want to talk about is just how do you orchestrate for indoor drumline. And there's been a lot of trial and error over the years. A lot of error, actually. And what's ended up happening, we've kind of gone through different phases where we've tried different things with the drums, smaller drums, deeper drums, more shallow drums, a lot of different setups for the pit, back of the floor, corner of the floor, front of the floor. We usually put our front ensemble spread out across the front. We found that's how they can connect to the audience the best, and people can actually read what they're doing and get the most natural sounds of the instruments. We will definitely amplify our boards this year. They are not amplified right now, and we actually haven't amplified for about 8 years. This will be the first time we've done that in a long time. And the reason for that is mostly the size of the battery and just making sure that we have the presence to match it. My personal approach to it is that I don't want you to know that they're amplified. I want it to just sound like we have a few more kids in the front ensemble, and that you hear the natural part of the instruments first, and that it's really just for support to kind of make the sound a little bit deeper and have more presence. So we try not to make it all come out of the speaker, so you'll notice that they have a pretty aggressive approach to the boards. Mallet choice is a big part of that, so that we have a nice warm sound that really projects out to the audience. Just to talk about the arrangement style, the thing that's been the most successful in the activity is just making sure that you arrange the right way for everything to be heard clearly. It's not so much about volume as it is the density of what's going on. So I'm going to give a couple examples. The first thing that they're going to play for you is just an 8-bar phrase where only the snare drums are playing. And you'll hear that there's a lot more layers going on in the front ensemble, some split parts within sections, people coming in at different times, a lot of different voicings. And that's because we're able to hear all those parts when it's only the snare drums playing. So you guys play C to D. Okay, so that's just a brief example, but marimbas entering at different times. I kind of have it voiced where one marimba and one vibe are playing the same part throughout there. So you'll get some articulation from the marimba sound, but you'll get some depth of sound from the vibes. This next part, we're going to actually start at the same place, start at C. And we're going to go to the end of this part of the show. What you'll notice is once the full battery comes in, we go to a much more unison approach. It's kind of in octaves, and most of the marimbas, all the marimbas are playing the same part, all the vibes are playing their own same part. The electronics are kind of adding to that sound. And then at the end, you'll hear where we create some space for what you'll hear from the battery later.